It can be lonely at the top. We all know what it's like to lead and own a business and wanting to scale, but finding yourself at a glass ceiling. That is where the power of collaboration and connection comes in. Hi, I'm Natasha Milani. I'm an expert at helping businesses and business owners harness the power of collaboration to connect, scale and grow. I am passionate about collaboration. I believe that no one executes alone and we all do better when we do it together. Welcome to this Power of Collaboration podcast. It's wonderful to have you here. I hope you get the inspiration and information you need to harness the power of collaboration to break through your glass ceilings. Today, I'm talking to Mike Scott, who is the Head of Product Partnerships with Yoco and the former founder of Nona, and a great friend of mine. Thanks, Mike, for joining us.
Good to be here. Thanks, Natasha.
Now, Mike, I'm going to start. Obviously, there's a bit of an accent with your voice there. Let's talk about who is Mike Scott and your background and what brought you to Adelaide.
So from Cape Town, South Africa, moved to Australia 3 years ago. Everyone says, why did you choose Adelaide? And I didn't choose Adelaide. When we got to Australia, we said, hey, we'll see you in Sydney. And the government said, no, you won't. You can choose basically Adelaide or Darwin. So we came to Adelaide and we love it. So we've stayed and we're pretty settled and we're very happy here. My background is kind of an interesting story. I started my first business when I was 15 at school. Didn't go to uni, kind of didn't look back from then. So I've got a bit of an unconventional background. I'm an absolute obsessive learner, but not in a sort of traditional sense. The very sort of short story is had one business, sold that business, then started my main business, which as a co-founder, which was Nona Digital. We were a software development company that focused on fintech and blockchain scale-ups. And 10 years after starting it, brought us to early this year where we were acquired by Yoco, which is a fantastic business that focuses on payments in Africa. And through the acquisition, I took on the role of head of product partnerships at Yoco, which is something that I didn't even know what it was when I started. And it's been an amazing opportunity to learn and grow. In a space that I'm pretty passionate about, which is collaboration and partnership. So that's the super abridged version of here I am, of why I'm here today.
So I'm thinking this is going to be quite a long podcast. I just want to go back a bit to, you mentioned at 15 you had your first business. Now, interestingly, it was your first business that ultimately kickstarted your career and your future businesses.
Yeah.
Tell that story.
So I guess it's maybe interesting to why I started my first business. So I've never been diagnosed, but I'm pretty certain I'm ADD or what's now called ADHD. I don't really care. I don't see it as a negative or a positive. It just is. But what does that mean? For me, it means that I can't force myself to study. I can't force myself to learn things. It was very evident to me. If I'm very interested in something, I obtain information at a much, much higher rate than I think most people. If I'm not interested in something, it's almost impossible for me to retain information. The problem is I can't control that, right? So at school, I did well in the subject that I loved. I did terribly in the subject that I didn't, and it had nothing to do with time put in or effort or anything. So that combined with my personality and my nature, it was pretty clear to me pretty early that I wasn't going to go out into the job world and become a professional and go and become a lawyer or an accountant or a doctor, because I just didn't think I'd be able to work for anyone. Funny that I'm nearly 40. I'm 40 this year, and this is the first time in my life I've had a job. So, late starter. So that was kind of like the setup. So what was evident to me is like, if I'm going to make any kind of success, it's going to be through being an entrepreneur, basically, starting my own businesses. So when you start a business at 15, I wasn't particularly good at it. So it took me a hell of a long time to learn how to business. But it was through very practical, hands-on experiences, which has always sort of resonated better with me. Rather than studying from a book, don't learn how to be an entrepreneur. Go and start a business. That's how you learn how to be an entrepreneur. And it did definitely set me up. The first business that I started, or the first real business, I kind of look at that as like my school fees, kind of like learning how not to do things. So when I look back on that business, very grateful to that business, but there are just so many things that I would have done so differently. And that is the value in it, to be honest. Then by the time we sort of got to Nona, and there's a huge gap in those timeframes or a lot of years there, I was able to implement a lot more stuff and learn a lot quicker to turn that into sort of like, okay, this is actually how you do business, how you run organizations that are good for the people, good for the founders, good for the clients, good for everything, that are sort of win-win-win situations. And it's very, very difficult to do that. And it definitely set me up with a mindset of, there's actually a book that I love by Yoco called Extreme Ownership. It set me up with a mindset of extreme ownership. And what I mean by that is basically everything is my fault and everything is under my influence. No one's coming to save me. No one's going to make excuses for me. Everything that I do, I've got to take full responsibility for. And yeah, so it definitely set me up for how I approach the world.
So just explain what that business was.
The first business was a very unsexy business, but a very necessary business. So it was tech infrastructure, IT support, right? So why I say very unsexy is because it's recession-proof, but at best, people are just ignoring you. Your general sort of status quo is they're just pissed off, right? It's a grudge spend. Like no one gets excited about calling their network engineer to come and fix their network or their computer.
So you're 15 years old and you went to residents and households, didn't you?
Businesses mainly, yeah.
Businesses.
Yeah.
And sold sort of tech support.
Yeah, anything from, I remember my first call out was installing a CD-ROM at my dad's friend's refrigeration business. So my brother had to drive me there because obviously I didn't have a car or a license. And I think we made a total profit of about negative $20. And I was like, shit, man, this is really hard to make money, you know? And it sort of grew from literally installing CD-ROMs to installing and maintaining networks to getting into quite sophisticated infrastructure.
That was your education, wasn't it?
I'm still in my education, but that's the point, right? That was the beginning of my education, yeah. And I really do believe that when it comes to business, yes, MBAs I think are very valuable, and I think I actually might still do one just out of interest. And yes, tertiary education and degrees are fantastic, but I think it's really difficult in business to beat practical experience. I really, really do. And I think it's, there's a great sort of experience in that is that, I think it was Henry Ford or one of the famous sort of stalwarts of business was sort of like, I don't need to study accounting and all of these things because if I create a business, I can just hire those people that are much smarter than me and much better in those domains. And that's sort of been my approach is, how do I create a business? How do I create an environment where I can bring in the people that are much smarter than me and much more specialist in their domains? And I can just create that vision, set the vision, hold people accountable, and create this environment that they want to work in that attracts people smarter, better, more specialist than me.
And that's what you did very successfully with Nona Digital. So fast forwarding from your first company as a 15-year-old, that did lead you ultimately to building a very successful business with Nona Digital. Just explain what Nona Digital is, and then I want to touch on some of those elements that you talked about then.
Yeah, so Nona Digital is no more because we were acquired recently, but what we were when we got acquired was quite a specialist software development company. We ended up being nearly 40 people, extremely high quality people in that business, and we focused on building software applications for fintech and blockchain scale-ups. That's quite specific, and the scale-up word for us had a particular meaning, which was companies that had hit product market fit and had raised a significant amount of funding. And the reason why that was that at that size, what mattered more to the businesses was quality and speed and velocity of development rather than cost. And what we did was expensive, and we focused on quality. We were not in the sort of lower end of the industry. We were in the top end of the industry. But what's more sort of interesting, I think, about that business was not what we built, but more the environment that allowed us to build quality software and attract and retain really strong engineers, designers, etc., in a market that is incredibly difficult to win at, especially because literally you're competing against Facebook, Google, Amazon, name the billion-dollar company. It's a global market. And we had to be able to answer the question, why should we work for Nona for a lot less money than going to work for a bank or a massive technology business? And we needed to be able to answer that question, not just with words, but with the environment. And that also shifted the way that I think about business considerably, is that I think it's shifted from you own a business, you interview people, those people are lucky to work for your business, and there's a huge power dynamic imbalance, to when you're interviewing people in product and software, they're more interviewing you than you're interviewing them. The power balance is far, far more even. And in fact, last year, I would say the power balance was significantly in the favor of software engineers. And I think that's great, by the way.
And I think that's travelling across more industries now in our own local backyard here in South Australia.
In the Great Resignation, right?
When, yes, that's right. Talent is hard to come by. But just going back to this environment, because this is critical. This, I think, is really one of the parts of your story that I want to delve into that I love the most. It's what made Nona Digital valuable to the company that acquired it, but it was unique. And you talk about retaining people. I want to go down into this environment, this culture piece, that framework you built around that. Can you just share that?
It's going to be really hard to talk about that quickly, but I'll try and sort of pull out some key points. So, number one, we stopped trying to figure everything out ourselves from scratch. We started to just look at who is the best in the world at doing X, Y, and Z. What are the frameworks? What are the operating systems we can just copy and focus more on execution? So things like scaling up, things like EOS from Traction, those are examples of fantastically useful practical tools that you don't have to think too much about what do I have to do here, but you do have to get really, really good at execution. So I really am a firm believer that disciplined execution in a business, continual disciplined execution will trump almost anything, even a bad strategy. And I know a lot of people argue with me on that because a great strategy allows for poor execution quite often. I agree with that. But similarly, phenomenal execution will almost always lead to success, unless you really are just going in the wrong direction. But I assume that most people aren't. The other part of this was hyper focus on the people in the business, the environment that they're in, the feedback loops that they're getting, the focuses on the things that they're working on, and this strong alignment between where is the business going long term? What does that look like in the shorter term, let's say 2 years? What does that look like in the next 12 months, down into enormous detail? What does that look like in the next quarter? And how does that relate to every single individual in the business? We needed to know that we could walk up to anyone in the business and say, hey, Bob, is it really clear that what you're doing right now, can you see how that's cascading to the quarterly priorities, to the annual priorities, to what Nona believes is its vision, its North Star, etc.? And that needed to just be constantly nurtured. So we had borderline obsessive ceremonies and processes. You know, the amount of meetings we had, the one-on-ones, the quarterly offsites, the company-wide stand-ups, the retros, the feedback sessions. It was just this constant nurturing of this environment. And this word culture, I think, is very important, and I speak about it a lot, but I wouldn't say it's misunderstood. I just think it's been like kind of misused. So I've started to use the word environment because it's actually just like, forget about this thing culture. Think about the work environment. Are you doing everything you can to create an environment in which your people do the best possible work? And here's the kicker, not for the business. Newsflash, no one cares about your business. You need to create an environment that they're doing it for themselves, for their own growth. And what does that do? When they're doing that, who's the benefit of that? The business. And I'm really paraphrasing here, but we spent a lot of time iterating on figuring out and constantly experimenting, how do we create the best possible environment for people to do their best work? Not how do we get people to sell their souls and kill themselves for Nona, because that's not a good thing, but more for themselves, for their own sense of mastery, autonomy, purpose, which comes from a book called Drive by Dan Pink. How do we create the environment where for themselves they're doing this amazing work, such that Nona then benefits from it? Which sounds quite simple, incredibly difficult to do in practice. So I'll stop there, because otherwise I'll just keep going forever, but hopefully that answers the question.
No, thank you, Mike. And I urge listeners to have a pen and paper ready, or just to jot down as you drop a list of books that you've read that have been valuable, because I'm sure you'll continue to do that. Just quickly on that, the environment you're talking about, and you're talking about that cascading, so everyone knew what their purpose and how they were connecting to the long-term goals of the organisation. You had quite an interesting process around performance review, for want of a better word, in your environment. How did you manage that with your people in terms of, we tend to put a lot of structure around it traditionally, and you're saying you had structure, but your environment is totally different to most businesses I've connected with. Can you just talk about how you manage that process within your organisation?
Yeah, we did a lot of things, and I think just on that comment with structure is, by nature, I'm someone that is incredibly disorganized, very unstructured, very much fly by the seat of my pants, and, just sort of impulsive by nature. I've learned, though, over the years to become extremely structured, extremely disciplined, extremely planned, because what that's done for me is it actually makes me feel a lot more calm. It actually sets me free, in my opinion, when I've got a very strong routine and a very strong structure, and it allows me to get a hell of a lot more done. So as someone who's not naturally disciplined and structured, I'm a real convert in this. Structure actually creates freedom. Structure actually creates the space to do amazing work and to actually feel a bit less freaked out by the world. Right. So with that said, we did a lot of stuff, but we didn't have anything that we called performance reviews ever, really, right?
I thought you would give me that actual answer.
Until someone's a problem in the business, I don't believe that performance review is the way to think about it. What we used to do is we used to have things called retrospectives. Now, in the product development world, that's a very common term. It's basically just looking back on what went well, what went badly, and what should we keep doing. So we would do a number of things. We would have quarterly retros with every single person in the business, and we had a very sort of fixed structure that went through. But that was more about listening and bringing focus back to what's important for the quarter ahead, and creating a feedback loop from feedback that we had solicited from everybody in the business. Now, it gets quite involved, so I won't go through everything, but basically, the fundamental premise here is that most businesses spend a lot of money and time on hiring great people, and then they just tell them what to do. They don't really listen. Jim Collins has got a great quote, which is hire the best people you can and then get out of their way. We looked at this and when we're spending so much money and time getting these amazing business people into the business, we need to listen to them. So we had to create mechanisms where we said, how do we pull feedback from people and ideas? But even that's not enough, because businesses that do that, that's usually where it stops. So what should we start doing? What should we stop doing? What should we continue doing? And then it stops. We were sort of saying, how do we pull this information? But then how do we build this into continual feedback loops so that people are actually sitting there going, oh, wow, they're actually listening to me. This is amazing. And if they are going to implement the thing, that's great. But if they're not going to implement the thing that I suggested, at least they'll tell me why. So we had these quarterly rhythms of one-on-one retrospectives, which basically looked like what's going well, what's not going well, what should we keep doing, what are your focuses for the next quarter, and anything else you want to talk about. Also, let's talk about your start, stop, continue feedback, and let's talk about your engagement scores. I'm being very oversimplistic here, but that's sort of the process here. And I think one of the big things I want to stress here is, as the leaders, it's far more about listening than it is about talking. But you do have to give guidance on, are you on the wrong track? Are you on the right track? Are you focusing on the right things? Okay, so that was one thing we did. I also used to try and check in every quarter, and I say try, because as you get to 10, 20, 30, close to 40 people, it becomes difficult. But I would try as the CEO to check in with every single person once a quarter, and I would just ask them 28 questions. I'd built up a list of 28 questions that I stole from people or made up myself or what have you. And for me, it's hard not to talk a lot, but my objective for those calls or those meetings was ask these questions and just shut up and listen. Like, pull this information from people. Those questions were things like, how safe do you feel at Nona? How happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10 and why? What would you like to be given a chance to fail at? What is your purpose? What is Nona's purpose? Do you see how your purpose is linked to Nona's purpose? What do we do for our clients? What is our vision? Where are we going in the next 10 years? Has somebody done something that's made a really positive impact on you in the last 90 days? And you get incredible insights from these things. But most leaders are just not prepared to do this. Most people just don't check in. I'll stop there for now, but we probably had 3 or 4 other ceremonies that we would do on at least a quarterly basis. Some things on a monthly basis, some things on a weekly basis. But the point of this is, hopefully it's clear that this is not a set and forget thing. You don't build amazing environments or build amazing cultures by just going, hey, let's put a pinball machine in the office or an extra coffee machine or beers on a Friday. This is stuff that needs to be nurtured every single day if you want to genuinely create the thing that you're telling people that you create. And there's one sort of question that has been very interesting for me, and that is that, well, not question, but just sort of experience is, just before we were acquired, actually, it was about 6 months into our most recent senior engineer's tenure with Nona. Really nice guy, really smart guy, very direct guy. And I was doing a one-on-one with him, and I said, how are things going? And he said, things are good. It's really cool because when I was interviewing at Nona, you guys made a whole lot of claims. And what's really nice is every single one of those claims is actually true. And I've never worked for a business where in the interview, all these things that I was told were actually just true. So there was no fireworks there. He wasn't saying, oh my God, this is the best place I've ever worked. It's amazing. He just went, this is really refreshing. You guys said you were a whole lot of things. Turns out you are actually those things. And I've never experienced that before. And there's a great thing you can do from that, because when you're hiring amazing people, you're going to tell them all these amazing things about your business. Hold yourself accountable by setting a retro with that person 90 days after they've started and just say to them, hey, we made a whole lot of promises to you. Have we delivered on those promises? So few businesses will even do that kind of thing. And that's a simple example of how we hold ourselves accountable to building these amazing environments.
And I particularly wanted to talk about the environment in Nona Digital that you created today in the podcast. But you just made a point then. I mean, we look at all these retention strategies, and we think about what's our retention strategies going to be for our people. But it's really simple things, isn't it? It's those grassroots, common, do what you say you're going to do and listen, and they are the best, the simple, and do them authentically.
Ask people what they need, decide if you can actually do it, and then do it. Sounds simple, is simple, very difficult, because you don't do it once a year. You're wasting your time if you do it once a year. It's so hard, but so critical that we create feedback loops. Humans need feedback. We need to know, A, that we're valued, B, that what we're doing actually matters, and C, that there's a purpose, that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. It's like these things are not complicated, but they're just difficult. And it in my experience, most founders of the kind of businesses that I come across, they see this stuff as sort of light and fluffy, where actually this is like foundational. And if you get this stuff right, you can actually get a whole lot of other stuff wrong, in my experience.
Thank you, Mike. Now, as you mentioned earlier, Nona Digital was acquired by a company called Yoco, and you've taken up a role as head of product partnerships. What does that mean, Mike?
Yeah, good question. I asked the same question when we first started talking about the role, which was super exciting for me because it's new and it's shiny. And as a typical ADD type person, new and shiny is attractive to me. So what does it mean? So look, now that I understand the role, the function, it's really exciting and it's really important. So I'll try and illustrate this with sort of more of a story and an anecdote than explaining directly. So I remember about 4 years ago when I was trying to bang down the doors of the banks through Nona to try and get work from them. They basically laughed me out of the room every time, respectfully, but they sort of said, listen, little boy, we're a bank. We'll do everything ourselves. You could never possibly add value to us. Thanks, but no thanks. If we need you to build a microsite for a campaign, we'll reach out to you. In other words, what are they saying? They were saying then that we're a bank, we don't partner. We do everything ourselves because we're better than everything. That has changed massively in the world. Now, in fact, somebody told me in the Australian context that there's a big four bank here that has literally taken a decision to basically never ever build any new software themselves. So they have their core, they will remain and nurture their core, but for pretty much any new venture, any new initiative, they will partner. That's the beginnings of this partnership world. So there's this decision that you need to take when you're in a technology company. Whenever you want to build a new feature or a new product or a new integration or new something, you can build it, you can buy it, or you can partner with the company to get it done. So we call that the build, buy, partner triangle. In that build, buy, partner triangle, the partner side of it is growing at an exponential rate around the world. It's for a number of reasons which we don't need to get into, but the most critical reason of which, in my opinion, is the access to talent and the velocity and the speed that you need that done, right? So when you're sitting in a product management meeting and someone says, hey, we want to do this new feature, we want to offer this additional product to our users. There's this discussion that needs to happen. Do we build this ourselves? Which what you're really saying is, do we take engineers and designers off existing things to put it on there? No, we don't want to do that. Okay. Do we go and buy a company that does this? Maybe you do that as your mergers and acquisition strategy, but that's a big decision. Your third option is, well, why don't we just partner with someone that's A, better than us at this one thing, B, much quicker to get this integration done, and C, we can enhance the user experience by doing this, right? That third partner thing is kind of, in the Yoco context, we took that even further down and we said product partnerships. So we're not talking about all partnerships across the business. We're talking about Yoco has a set of products. We're very established. We're very successful in the market. We never want to stop improving these products. My role is to make sure that we are seeking out, getting on board, and nurturing the partnerships that we need to deliver on the products for our business. Interestingly, there is not enough literature yet, not enough guidance, not enough leadership around the world on this space, but it is vastly, vastly growing. From the research that I'm doing, I think the number of product partnership leaders or partnership leaders around the world has grown 5x over the last 2 years. Pretty much every executive in the reports that I'm reading that are being reviewed and interviewed are saying that partnerships forms a critical part of their strategy for the next 5 to 10 years. The problem is very few of them actually know what that execution looks like. And to be honest, I've only been in the role for 4 months. We're also figuring out exactly what the execution looks like. So to answer the question, what is product partnerships? It is quite simply the partnerships required to deliver on our product roadmap in a way that makes sense to us, to our customers, in our case merchants, and to the partners. It's a new world that's opening up that is absolutely critical, in my opinion.
And that relates to my passion around collaboration, but that's almost at a new level, isn't it? And it's also, I guess, around distribution in a way, and also acquisition of technology and software, and so it's all almost two-way in many instances, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So in partnerships, we talk about the win-win-win, right? The win for us as the company, the win for the partner company, but more important than both of those is the win for the customer. In our case, the merchants. So Yoco's customers are merchants, right? So for us, it's got to work for all three of us. And that might sound pretty obvious, but it's actually really difficult to do that because you often get fixated on one. You get fixated on what we need, or you get fixated on the partner need, especially if the partner is a much bigger company. So if the partner is like a bank, you get fixated on their needs, where actually your guiding light in these transactions, which I'm learning, is your guiding light is what's the customer getting from this? And there needs to be this win-win-win. And that sounds simple and it sounds quite cliche-ish, but it's actually an incredibly difficult thing to keep front of mind because usually it's going to skew to one of those things. And if it's going to skew to one of them, at least make sure it's skewing towards the consumer, the end point. The other comment I'll make on that is that, we're doing a lot of work now just defining our partner types. Because again, that simple definition of what are the types of partners we're going to engage with, how do we engage differently with the different partner types, and more importantly, in our function, because Yoco is a big business, what are we going to say no to? What are we not going to engage with? Because if we engage with those ones, we're diluting our focus and diluting our efficacy on the ones that we do want to focus on and nurture. So it's very early days for me. I'm learning a lot. But I'm nowhere, I don't consider myself an expert yet, but I'll get there. What I can tell you is it's only going to grow. The need for partnerships in technology businesses for sure, and probably not even technology businesses. There's no ways this is a fad. There's no ways this is a nice to have. It needs to be a core competency, in my opinion, in every significant technology business for them to be a success because you just simply cannot do it all yourself anymore. It's just not possible.
So a couple of key insights there. One is partnerships it's almost a strategy in its own right. It's also about what you say no to. And particularly what resonates with me, and this has always been inherent for any sort of collaboration, connection and partnerships, is the win-win-win. And as you say, pointing to the customer at the end of it. But I think any kind of collaboration or people-to-people connection has to be about someone else winning, in my view. Just in summary, and I think you mentioned that you're going to become an expert in partnerships. We'll have to have another podcast discussion, I think. But just in a couple of tips to end this very rich conversation and insights that you've shared today is, for those listening, what are the couple of practical tips and elements of success around key partnerships that a business owner who's an SME here in South Australia might just want to put on their radar?
So I think probably the biggest learning that I'm focused on at the moment is there's a temptation to focus on the partner, but not the partner initiative. We have an inclination to think about, hey, I want to partner with that bank. And then we get fixated on the bank and the partner. But that's not where we should start. Where we should start is we should talk about the initiative. So we should focus on, I want to be able to offer this thing to those people, and I need that partnership to do that. We need to start at that level, and we need to go through the strategy and the planning of the internal alignment. What are the core terms of the agreement that we need? What's the SWOT analysis? What are the things that are the absolute must-haves? What are the things that we're actually negotiable on? What are the goals for this partnership over the next 90 days, 1 year? Where does this add strategic value? What are we getting from this? All before we've even engaged with the potential partners. And this has been a key learning of mine, because what happens if you don't do this is you get too fixated on the partner, not the partnership. And you also lack internal alignment. And depending on the size of your organization, if it's a very small organization, there's probably less of a risk of this. But if it's a bigger organization, that internal alignment piece before you actually go to market of, let's say, shopping for a partner is so critical. Because if it's not, you're going to sign the partnership agreement, you're going to go through all of this work, you're going to sign these long tail agreements, etc., etc. And a year down the line, you're going to be unclear on how to measure success. You're going to be unclear on what do we actually talk about when we meet every month. And it's critical to do the sort of quote unquote boring pre-work beforehand. These should not be taken as quick sales. These should not be taken as quick agreements. You should not have tons and tons and tons of partnerships. You should have a select few set of partnerships that give you a strategic advantage in the market that you couldn't otherwise get. So it's not very like sexy and bells and whistles, but it's very much like do the work to think about why you want to partner before you even talk to a potential partner.
Great insight. And just finally, what book are you reading now, Mike?
I am reading, I don't usually do this, but I'm reading 4 books at the moment, which is not great. I don't recommend that. But the one that I'm enjoying and that's most pertinent, it might start playing now while I look at the title. It's called The Cold Start Problem, which I'm absolutely loving. It's written by, I can't remember his name, but he's an A16Z investor, Andrew Chen. Absolutely brilliant. Loving it. I'm rereading for about the 5th time Measure What Matters. Just the best book ever on OKRs. Totally unrelated, I have next to my bedside all the time a book called Practicing the Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. It's just one of my favorite.
It's a great book.
And then the other book next to my bed is something called, I think it's called 4,000 Weeks, which is a pretty hardcore but amazing book on how we are using our time in life because we only have on average about 4,000 weeks. So reading quite a lot, which I don't like to do. I like to only read one book at a time, but I'm failing dismally at that.
I think that's a good fail. Mike, thank you so much for your time. There's so much information, and I suggest anyone listening go back to the start and listen again because you'll pick up more and more points. So thank you so much for your time today and look forward to seeing you back in the Leaders Room soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to chat, as always, and thanks for the work that you're doing to build up this community.
At SA Leaders, we are all about collaboration and community. If you're curious to know more about how we help businesses and leaders just like you scale and grow beyond their glass ceilings, then visit our website at www.saleaders.com.au. And please don't forget to subscribe, share this podcast with your network, and write a review if you really enjoyed it. This has been an Audiosity production. I'm Natasha Milani, and I look forward to chatting with you next time. Happy connecting.